Ben Jerkovich, and you're watching Crash Course World History. Now, usually John Green, when he makes these videos, he likes to include humor into his videos to, lighten the mood when he's talking about some stuff. But usually when he has a very serious topic, he doesn't include a lot of humor. And so today's video is probably going to be not very humorous because we're covering maybe the most serious topic in Crash Course World History, the Holocaust. The Holocaust is one of the worst tragedies that has ever happened throughout the history of the world, and not many tragedies of its magnitude have occurred since. The effects of the genocide of over 11 million people by the German Nazi regime led by Adolf Hitler are still felt today. Jews were the most executed in the Nazi labor and extermination camps, but Romani, mentally and physically handicapped, homosexual, Slavs, and various other ethnicities not fitting into the Nazis' idea of perfection were executed as well. All of this happened during World War II and was a part of Germany's plan to basically take over the world, which, since we're not all speaking German right now, obviously didn't come to fruition. Jews were imprisoned in concentration and death camps and ghettos, neighborhoods where they were to be confined until they could be deported out of Europe. This deportation never really took place, and the inhabitants mainly ended up being sent to extermination camps. In total, there were about 42,500 ghettos and camps, spanning German-controlled areas from France to Russia, including Germany itself, from 1933 to 1945. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany, starting a chain of events that would eventually lead to the deaths of millions. By the time Hitler had risen to power, anti-Semitism was already present in German culture, and early interviews with the future Führer revealed his plans to annihilate the Jews once he took power. At first, the Nazi Party divided its enemies into three categories: racial, including the Jews and the Romani; political, including Marxists and liberalists; and the moral, including homosexuals and habitual criminals. All of these three groups would eventually be included in extermination camps during the Holocaust. On November 7, 1938, Jewish miner Herschel Grünspan assassinated Nazi German diplomat Ernst von Rath in Paris, providing the Nazis an excuse to use physical violence against the Jews, claiming it to be expressions of public outrage. Before the mass killings began, talk of deporting and resettling the Jews was seriously considered, but never really took shape. As Germany took over more and more of Europe during World War II and before, each state that took over put in anti-Semitic laws, and plans for mass killings began to take shape. Let's go to the thought bubble.
Concentration camps began to be founded at the beginning of the Third Reich, and although the death rate was high, they were not initially designed as places to kill Jews, but places for them to be incarcerated. By 1939, however, the camps became places where Jews were either killed or made to work as slave laborers, during which they were undernourished and tortured. Prisoners were literally worked to death, or, if not to death, then physical exhaustion, after which they were shot or gassed. As you would guess, the conditions in these camps were beyond horrible, and prisoners were even experimented upon in inhumane ways to try and further the scientific knowledge of the Nazis. Those experimented on did not give their consent and usually died as a result of the experiment. Experiments ranged anywhere from testing new military technologies to genetics shared between twins. In Nazi-occupied Poland, Jewish ghettos were set up, the aforementioned neighborhoods where Jews were confined in compact areas and basically left to die, or left until they could be moved to extermination camps, which most prisoners who survived the lack of food, shelter, and diseases like typhoid were. These neighborhoods were governed by a Jewish council appointed by the Germans, called Judenrats, who oversaw the day-to-day running of the camps, but whose most important purpose was to compile lists of deportees who were to be murdered. Most councils ultimately complied, but those who didn't were shot, and even if they did comply, since they were Jewish, they were most likely killed in the end anyway.
Next thought bubble. In January of 1942, the Wannsee Conference was held, and it was decided by 15 Nazi leaders that the remaining 6.5 million Jews still living in Europe were to be transported to extermination camps and gassed as quickly as possible. The camps and ghettos were met with some resistance, such as the Warsaw Uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland, probably the most famous ghetto of them all, but most were unsuccessful. As Allied troops converged on the camps following the discovery of their existence after the escape of a Jewish prisoner, from 1944 to 1945, Jews who were still alive in the camps were marched out for miles to get them to places where they could be transported elsewhere before they could be liberated by the Allied forces. Finally, after years of fighting in World War II, the Allied forces were extremely close to winning, and as they got closer and closer, more and more camps were liberated from the Nazi regime. The first camp to be liberated was Chelmno by the Soviets on January 20th, 1945, and the remaining camps were liberated throughout the rest of 1945, finally bringing end to the extreme cruelty of the Holocaust. No, looks like it's time for the open letter.
I'm Noah. Open letter. Dear Hitler, why did you have to kill millions of innocent people in an attempt to annihilate a whole race? You promised that you wouldn't break peace with Russia, but boy did you, in tremendous fashion. You brought the genocide of Jews, millions, in Nazi-occupied Europe. The Jewish population at the time was roughly 9.5 million. By the end of your little tirade, the Jewish population stood at 3.5 million. You were a ruthless killer and a mass murderer. I do not know what you were thinking, and ultimately no one really will. When you looked in the mirror, did you not see that you, yourself, did not fit your own description of blonde hair, blue eyes? How could somebody be so judgmental of an entire race? This absolutely baffles me. How one person could bring about so much hate and oppression is beyond me. You're probably the face of pure evil in today's culture, and for good reason. You couldn't even give the world the satisfaction of trials for your crimes, choosing suicide instead of facing a jury. Ultimately, the world would have been a better place without you, but going back in time to ensure you never existed would probably just screw up the timeline horribly and make monkeys rule the earth somehow. So we're forced to learn about your crimes and try to make sure they never happen again. Definitely not best wishes, Ben and Noah. The thing you learned from that letter: don't be a Hitler. Few events throughout history can match the Holocaust in terms of both death and cruelty. This genocide of the Jewish people needs to be talked about and remembered, to honor the millions dead and to ensure that nothing of this nature ever occurs again. As the Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel warned, to forget a Holocaust is to kill twice. 11 million people lost their lives during this horrible time, and no one knows how many more had the Nazis' forces prevailed over the Allies. Nothing can compare the horrors of the Holocaust, and hopefully nothing in the future ever will. And ultimately, it can be considered one of the worst acts that mankind has ever inflicted on itself. Thanks for watching. Sorry it was a bit of a downer. We'd like to thank the internet for giving us the resources to research this topic, Ms. Soderberg for teaching us this whole year, the library for providing a place to work, our parents with the cameras, laptops, internet at home, John Green for helping us throughout the year with crash courses, and mainly the inspiration for this video, and everyone for sitting through our 10-minute presentation on one of the most depressing topics you could ever cover in Crash Course World History. Stay classy, fifth grade.